Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I'm your host, Veteran Mountain Man, and I guess I was wrong. I'm going to have to do a Debunking Extreme Anarcho-Capitalism, Volume 4. I was looking over some of the responses to Part 3, and specifically Anarcho-Capitalist Kitty, who seems to be a relatively nice woman, created a 3-hour live stream debunking the concept that you need a shared defense and shared judiciary. Part of that was seriously hinging on the concept that reputation and the idea of voluntaristic contract and contractual obligations would do away with a need for a shared judiciary entirely. Now, there's some serious flaws to this. First flaw is that you're assuming the individual who is willing to violate your rights also cares about his reputation, his or her reputation. Now, if a person is willing to kill you, steal your stuff, or rape you, or any combination thereof, they pretty much don't care about their public reputation already, out the box. So the idea of shunning or isolationist or blacklisting of an individual in this scenario doesn't always hold effective capability, because then what they will end up doing is they will turn to others who have done the same thing and create their own community, creating a group who will hierarchically attack and transgress individuals' rights en masse. This creates the roving gangs and bands of thugs concepts that anarchy actually promotes. Okay, because once you start shunning them from polite individuals who will respect the NAP no matter what, or whatever sort of communal, societal, basic moral standard you construct, they will in turn create their own construct to then use. And this you can see quite clearly with the gangland activity in the United States, the rise of the mafia during Prohibition, the warlords throughout Africa, the cartels and organized criminal gangs in Central and South America, the creation of tribal nation-states in ancient Greece, the creation of city-states and nation groups throughout the Middle East during the Zoroastrian period and Babylonian periods post-Egyptian society. All of these things show that groups of individuals will band together for united survival on their own, even if polite society shuns them. The only way you can mandate a public shaming and shunning scenario is if you can effectively shun that person from everyone, period, end of story, la-di-da-di. You can't shun them from one group but basically leave them free to go join another group. Because if that other group decides not to hold the same standards or concepts, they will accept that person and in turn use them as part of their society to create whatever they're trying to create. In this case, it would be most likely a group that would band together for shared survival and acquisition of resources through limited efforts, such as robbing individuals who can't effectively defend themselves and or possibly killing them. Now, we come back to this concept of voluntaristic contracts as well. And the problem with a voluntaristic contract without a shared societal adjudication system has some serious fundamental flaws. One of those flaws being very, very simple, and that is that you have no effective enforcement mechanism for the violation of said contract. You also don't have a limiting of scope of that voluntaristic contract, which is normally created through a shared understanding of what the law allows. So an example of this would be Representative Crenshaw was talking with Ben Shapiro on the Sunday Conversation, and he was talking about an incident on the Texas border where Border Patrol agents acquired 12 individual minors from a group who were not with their parents and were with smugglers. Now, they were destined for a house in Texas where they found 57 other illegals, all of whom were being held prisoner because they hadn't made good on their contract. This is an example of what individual enforcement of a private contract can become without a shared judicial structure. See, slavery in and of itself came from indenture in the United States. An indenture was the signing of a private contract where an individual would assume debt for another individual's employ or work. And that debt was usually the amount of debt it took to transfer themselves to the new world and set up and produce goods and services for that person they were indebted to exclusively until their indebtedness was paid off. Now, this was allowed by law. Now, that makes that law an unjust law because it's effectively selling yourself into temporary bondage. Regardless of that point, it's a salient fact that that will happen without a shared judiciary structure that can effectively state that this type of contractual obligation is not valid in your society. You have to have someone who can determine if a contract is legally binding, determine if the clauses in a contract are enforceable, and determine if a violation of that contract has occurred. Now, not only do you need that, which is a basic fundamental principle of a judiciary system, you also need a way of enforcing contractual obligations and societal requirements of joint interaction that will not stop you from producing goods and services. So if you alone are responsible for enforcing the stipulations of your contract, as well as the other individual engaged in the contract, and the other individual violates the contract, and then kills you and hides your body, you have no one else who can take up the violation of contract and the violation of your rights on your behalf. Now, you could say, well, we could set it up so that a second person has to be instantiated within the variations of the contract, which, again, would have to require a joint judiciary to adjudicate the legalities of that and the requirement of that and enforce that requirement. Or you could even state that, say, family could also adjudicate on behalf of a missing individual or a dead individual or their communal group. But at this point, if you start talking about their communal group, you've created a shared judiciary. You have created a shared adjudication system. And this has been one of my fundamental arguments against anarcho-capitalism, even though I support a lot of its basic principles. Now, I support voluntarism. I support it 100% that things should be voluntary. But in order to ensure things are voluntary, you cannot have a non-third party neutral arbiter to ensure that things instantiate voluntarily. Because if you don't, you will have people creating contracts that will create slavery, create indenture, instantiate clauses that can't be met knowingly, and try to sneak it past individuals with no redress if they miss it in the construction of the contract. And these are going to be things that people will do no matter what. And if you don't believe me, go back and re-listen to my second discussion, Debunking Anarcho-Capitalism, which was 10 minutes long, by the way, and discussed why the NAP principle will not hold without enforcement. And that is because there are individuals who will see an easy opportunity to take advantage of an individual and in turn violate their rights anyway. And without a shared adjudication redressment that has to be initiated, that should be instantiated as a neutral system, that means neither you nor the individual you're contracting with pays for it as a private source. So neither one of you has an individual stake in how they rule. You're not going to be able to establish that. And even if you establish a system, which I've heard some people argue this, you could establish a system where a neutral third-party arbiter had to be instantiated in the contract, had to be paid for by both individuals engaging in the contract. You've now opened yourself up to a very serious problem, which is the same problem that you see with judicial activism in the United States. You'll receive arbitrary rulings which are not instantiated necessarily in the contract. Now, this can also happen with neutral third-party arbitration, such as a shared societal arbitration. But in a shared societal arbitration, the group has a mechanism to remove the individual as a group and ensconce a new individual who will keep to the individual values of the group. That being said, you create the ability to redress this. Now, the United States missed this when establishing their judiciary. I think it's a concept that needs to be fixed within the United States. But I'm not in control of the government myself, or I would be looking at trying to find a way to fix this. I think you could honestly get a lot of support to fix this problem. But that is something completely different. That's not germane to the topic. So, while I appreciate the 4-hour discussion with you and your friends and a bunch of individuals that joined you on a live stream, I think that you've missed the basic concept of what a judiciary is and how it is based on the concept that you yourself should be able to ensure that no matter the situation, the contractual obligations can be met and adjudicated fairly by somebody not involved within the contract. And that is something that all societies need. And it's one of the reasons I postulate that it must be a function of the governance of that society. Now, you could set it up so that you have such as a magistrate, and that magistrate is versed on the policies and concepts and constructs of the community and is directly responsible to the community. And that would be fine. Even if they're not paid and they do it voluntarily, I could see that working. But that still requires that level of government, which is one of my disillusioning debunkings of the extremist ANCAP position. Thank you all for joining me. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, or follow and subscribe on BitChute. Also, don't forget to check out my other social media sites. And I'm going to try to do a live stream Monday night, of course. I'm also hoping to get some more videos out this week. And as always, have yourself a beautiful